Hello, and welcome to the In the Tank podcast, episode 214, the show where we explore the work of think tanks throughout the country. As always, my name is Isaac Orr, policy fellow at the Center of the American Experiment, hosting the show. And joining me today via the interwebs, we have. Oh, wait.
Yeah.
Who should I introduce first? Joining me via Skype, just kidding, via Zoom today, we have Big Jim Lakely, Communications Director at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing great, and I'm the actual host, but you're on a roll. Go.
Thinking he's the actual host, Big Jim Lakely. Also joining me on Zoom, we have Justin Haskins, Executive Editor of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing very well. And classic Donnie impression by Isaac, you got my title wrong.
Oh, what is your title these days?
Editorial director, Donald.
Editorial director at the Heartland Institute. All right, Jim, take it away.
All right, gosh, your little mini-me Donnie impression is pretty good, I must say. But
it's pretty good.
So our usual host for the In the Tank podcast, Donald Kendall, is on vacation this week. So I am doing the fill-in duties while I think he's taking in the peak colors of the fall season here in the Midwest. It's a perfect time for that. Very beautiful outside. As Isaac said, I am Jim Lakely, Director of Communications at the Heartland Institute. And the In the Tank podcast, we don't just talk about, what the think tanks across the country are up to, some interesting things, but also
the work of think tanks throughout the country.
Word for word, you're correct. But we also talk about the news of the week as it applies to what we do here and what we're passionate about here at the Heartland Institute. So we thank you for listening. But before we get started, I do have a favor to ask. If you are listening to this right now on iTunes on your Apple device or on Google Play on your Android device or any of the other platforms this podcast can be found, and SoundCloud, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeartRadio, Player FM, please take the time to give us a 5-star review and even write up some positive comments. This is the best way that we can grow this podcast, and it's really important that you do so because we don't have a lot of money to promote it in any other way. So if you are listening to this, actually even watching it on YouTube, you can also share that video with your friends on social media. Put it on Facebook, tweet it out, mention it to your friends. That really helps us grow, and we appreciate all of the work and the help that you all provide. Now, I'm going to do a quick rundown of the topics we're going to get to. We hope to get to all of them within this hour-long podcast, and we'll do our best to do so.
Wait. Can I do one more thing? Should be a relatively short show today.
Yeah, and it never is. Perfect.
I'm just going to interject my Donnie impression whenever it makes sense to do so.
Yeah, Donnie will greatly appreciate that when he listens to this, for sure. But we're going to talk about a new poll that found that a majority of Americans want to rewrite the First Amendment to, quote, reflect the cultural norms of today, and in order to, quote, stop hate speech, which, might even include this podcast at some point. Number 2, we'd like to talk about that some professors in the United Kingdom have created a chaos map that supposedly shows that violent deaths will soar in 10 years due to food and water shortages and, as you can guess, probably climate change as well. Third item, 47 state attorneys general are now investigating Facebook for antitrust violations. That's a growing issue here. And fourth, on the think tank front, Heartland friends Sally Pipes of the Pacific Institute and Reason's Nick Gillespie, they won a debate in New York City arguing against Medicare for All, and really they convinced a pretty hostile audience hosted by Intelligence Squared. So that's a pretty interesting thing to talk about. And if we have time, Bette Midler on Twitter has been wishing violence to befall Senator Rand Paul, somebody who has been on this podcast, as a matter of fact, for committing the crime of disagreeing with her and not being a leftist. And so I love talking about the tolerant, loving left, especially when they continually advocate violence. Anyway, with that rundown, we are now ready to get started with issue 1, as John McLaughlin might say. Headline in the Free Beacon: poll, majority of Americans want First Amendment rewritten. 51% of millennials want fines or jail time for hate speech. You millennials, you're going to have to answer for this, so we'll get to it in a minute. So the Campaign for Free Speech is the outfit that conducted this survey. And they said the results, quote, indicate free speech is under more threat than previously believed. Wow. You think? Yeah, I think. More than 60% of Americans agree on restricting speech in some way, while a slim majority, 51%, want to see the First Amendment rewritten to, quote, reflect the cultural norms of today. Out of the 1,004 respondents to this poll, young people were the most likely to support curbing free expression and punishing those who engage in quote unquote hate speech. And nearly 60% of millennials agreed that the Constitution, quote, goes too far in allowing hate speech in modern America. Justin Haskins, you're a millennial. Answer for your generation.
It's hard to answer for them. It's really hard to do. This is embarrassing. It's really embarrassing. Although I will say this, it says here 48% of Gen Xers and 47% of baby boomers held the same position, which really isn't that great.
No, that's pretty troubling. It's not 60%, but it's troubling.
It's not 60%, but it's basically half the country.
Jim, you're going to quibble over the, what is it, the 13%? Because you're a boomer, right?
I'm a Gen Xer. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Back in my day when milk cost a quarter.
Listen, Sonny.
Yeah.
No, I don't think Jim is a boomer, but I will say, but the point is, I really don't know that. I think if you're gonna analyze why is it 60%, I think you can blame the 48% of Gen Xers and 47% of baby boomers who have been running the country for the past 30, 40 years.
And the institutions, Jim.
Wait.
All the institutions, the media, the Hollywood, every single school in America, practically, the vast majority of colleges. I mean, they're the ones who are running all these institutions.
Yeah, Jim.
All these millennials.
Answer for yourself.
Answer for your stupid generation.
So it's our fault because we were brainwashed by your greatest generation.
Yeah, exactly.
Look, now I'm the greatest generation. I used to be a boomer. Now he's put me another generation back. I am 104 years old. No, actually, Justin, I'm still waiting for Gen X to have our turn. You know, we were the skipped over generation. Every commercial on TV was all about boomers and playing 60s rock music in every stupid car commercial. And then the Generation X, we had about 2 years of ads directed toward us, which is a signal to the culture that this is the generation that is important. We need to pay attention to them. And after about 2 years, we got skipped over. Hey, it's all about millennials now, and now it's Gen Z. So I'm still waiting for Gen X to have their turn in this
80s
culture.
Music sucks. You'll never have it.
Well, now we're getting 80s music for retirement plans for mutual funds and stuff.
Now
which my wife, when I hear that, I go, oh no, you're kidding.
Jim Lakely, lifelong member of AARP.
I'm not eligible till next year. But I mean, I am still going to blame millennials because it's not just that it's 60%, but here's you guys. This is what you guys have been taught, and it wasn't me. I'm not in a public school system. I've been trying to teach millennials liberty and freedom and to embrace that my whole adult life, and you guys have too for your own generation. But here in this story, it says the majority of millennials also supported laws that would, quote, make hate speech a crime. And of those supporters, 54% say the violators should be in jail for committing a quote-unquote hate speech crime. And another interesting fact is that this poll was released just 2 days after 2 University of Connecticut students were arrested for allegedly saying racial slurs in a viral video. And under a Connecticut state statute, that makes it a crime to, quote, ridicule certain persons. A crime, a hate crime. You know, this is the kind of stuff. It's actually, you're seeing this more and more in Britain, where it is. I mean, gosh, you can get the police come after you if you tweet something that they don't like. I mean, what the hell's going on with free speech? Not just in America, but in the Western world. It's been eroding in Europe, and it seems to have come across the ocean.
Yeah, but I just think it's going to make for more interesting reality television, like Real Housewives of the Gulag. No, this is actually
Isaac's always bringing it back to reality TV.
I mean, look at it, the potential there. You don't even have to pay them. They're already going to be in jail. They'll be looking for a break from the boredom. But no, this is actually a really big problem. When I was in college, one of my professors was the I guess, the faculty advisor for a publication called The Flip Side. And you could write anything you wanted in that. And my professor was a very straight-laced, devout Christian, but he would let anybody write anything in that because he just believes in the importance of free speech. There is a very good book that I can't remember the name of. It's by Jonathan Rauch. I think it's called Kindly Inquisitors, that talks about how if you do not allow people to feel like they can express their grievances and vent their frustrations in a vocal way, they will take to violent means in order to achieve that end. So like that's one of the problems with sending all of these types of like this thought policing. It sends it underground, and you don't have, these people are no longer exposed to people that are debunking or convincing them that their thoughts are maybe not the most intelligent. So like you're basically forcing people to retreat into like intellectual bunkers, and that's not good for society.
Yeah, I think that's actually a really good point. I also think it's important to I think the biggest challenge we have with millennials and people who are younger than millennials is that they view everything through the prism of is this particular action, whatever it might be, is this particular policy or proposal or thing in society, is it going to help people? Like that's how they view everything.
Yeah.
Do I think it's going to help people? They don't really care about rights or freedoms or how all of that kind of interconnects. They'll sell rights away in a heartbeat if they think that it's going to help somebody. That doesn't really mean much to them. And I think though what's really interesting is that they've also, in addition to being indoctrinated into various left-wing ideas, they've also been indoctrinated into believing in the value of diversity in all forms. They believe in diversity. Yet there's a gigantic contradiction here between all kinds of different leftist ideas and policies and proposals, including this view on free speech and diversity. If you really have a love of diversity and you really do respect the differences among various groups of people, well, then that should extend to intellectual diversity too. And yet it doesn't. It does on a variety of things. It does for religious diversity. It does for
kind of.
It does in the sense that they want various groups. I understand what you're saying. You're saying, they don't want necessarily evangelical Christians running around telling them how to live their lives or whatever.
Right.
They want to strip them from the public square, but they only want to strip them from the public square because they've been told that evangelical Christians want to get rid of all these other religious groups. That's a big reason why they believe that. And so I think that they believe that diversity is really important, while at the same time believing that there are all these groups that are intellectually dangerous and we can't allow them to exist in society. And those two things are a gigantic contradiction. It's a gigantic hypocrisy. And I think if you can point that out to younger people and they can actually understand that and be forced to deal with that, it might actually turn things around on free speech. Because if given a choice between diversity and eliminating hate speech, I think these people have been so indoctrinated into believing the value of diversity that they would probably choose diversity every single time.
Yeah.
So I think it needs to become a diversity issue.
Right.
I think that's an important way of framing this.
Well, it's racial. It's let's just be blunt about it. It's racial diversity and sexual identity and all of that. But it's checkbox diversity, when the most important diversity, of course, is intellectual diversity. I mean, we have. It's funny. At the same time, that I saw that story yesterday on the poll. There was a battleground poll that came out that showed that 67% of Americans think America is on the edge of a civil war. Quote: "The majority of Americans believe that we are 2/3 of the way to being on the edge of a civil war." Unquote. And I imagine they mean a shooting civil war. And I'm actually not surprised by this. I think there's a lot to be said that maybe we need a divorce. Maybe we are so split ideologically as a country. And again, these millennials who think 60% think that the Constitution goes too far in allowing free speech, and they want people who commit hate speech crimes to be put in jail. Why shouldn't they believe this? You know, they grew up reading Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. They have gone to college where diversity is it's not just diversity is our strength, is diversity is all we must promote, and diversity is the most important thing, as you just said, Justin. But they also have embraced Bernie, who says, you know, this is a revolution, you know, and AOC that says this is a this is going to be a revolution. And heck, even Barack Obama said famously, just before the election in 2008, we are 5 days away from fundamentally transforming the United States of America. And so, yes, if free speech is not honored, if free speech is not protected, that is a fundamental transformation in the United States. And so no wonder some people are thinking that maybe we are 2/3 of the way. In fact, not just some people, 67% of Americans think that we're 2/3 of the way to being on the edge of a civil war. Isaac?
Wow, that surprises me. You know, like we're still the United States of America, and I think one of the issues that we're having right now is that there's really nothing else going on in terms of there's nothing that's uniting us because there's no common enemy. And you know, during the Cold War, it was the Soviet Union. Obviously, after 9/11, there was this thought that, you know, well, we're Americans, we stand for something good, and part of this is the fact that, you know, we have been subjected to the people's history of the United States. I had a you know, history teacher in high school that had us read from that, and it's kind of just, you know, undermining that shared identity, or what do they call it? I think In the Tank talked about it. It's like the civil religion of the United States. And you know, we don't think that the United States is great, or at least there's a very big swath of the country that thinks the United States isn't great and never was. I don't share that opinion.
Right.
But you know, I guess maybe, but I just don't think that we're actually on the verge of a shooting war, because why would the other side do that? They're the ones that don't have any guns.
That's right.
So, I mean, I do think that there is, you know, it's like high stakes political stuff now. That's why we're told that every election is now the most important election ever. And it's interesting because we're seeing this in Canada too. I'm working on a piece with Jason Hayes from the Mackinac Institute, just saying that we should welcome Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan to be states in the United States, just because they don't feel like they're being represented either.
Yeah.
So, you know, there is this continual fractionalization of the body politic. But man, I just don't know if I'm ready to go. We need a complete separation.
No, I mean, I don't believe that either, but I think mentally a lot of people have. I mean, with all of this, and it's the same thing all the time. There isn't any diversity of thought. There isn't any real tolerance of a difference of opinion anymore in this country. And that's really driven by the left that controls academia, Hollywood, and the media. You know, you think about all this Russian hoax nonsense. You know, we would not be hearing about any of that stuff if Hillary won the election. None of that would have been news. Not a single bit. It all would have not been suppressed. In fact, Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too movement wouldn't have happened if Hillary won the election. All this stuff has been percolating up, and it's just making us more divided as a country. We don't have a common enemy, as you mentioned, Isaac, and we don't seem to have a common purpose anymore, or a common love of country. That used to be kind of a given. Even the left, even Pete Seeger, kind of loved his country when he was writing protest songs as a communist in the United States. He probably loved his country because we didn't shoot him or put him in jail for being a communist, which made us very different from the countries that he was embracing. You know, I just think. Go ahead, Isaac. Or I'm sorry. Go ahead, Justin. Justin.
Yeah, I think at the root cause of all of this is this idea that every decision has to be made at the federal level.
Yeah.
Like, I think that's really the root cause of all of this, because the reason, I mean, Isaac talked about high stakes elections. I think that with the Supreme Court, there's obviously a lot of issues that are related to that. The Supreme Court is 9 people. These votes are decided by 1 vote, 2 votes all the time. So literally two people are the difference between whether you have a certain right or you don't have a certain right anymore. The idea that we're making all these decisions at the federal level, it means that every single election, federal election, is in a sense your way of life is being put at risk every 2 to 4 years. That's what it means. And so every person on both sides of the aisle, who's really super political and is following this stuff closely, is always in a sense that their side is either moving in the right direction because they have control over everything, or they're losing all of their rights and they're on the verge of being thrown into a prison because, Donald Trump is a monster, or because Bernie Sanders hates free speech, or whatever, right? And so whether all of that is completely 100% true or some of it's exaggerated and not, isn't really the point. The point is people feel that way. They feel like the country is on the verge of collapse because they feel like their side is either winning, but the others at the expense of the other side, or that their side is losing, or that their side is about to lose, or whatever. And so if these choices were all being made at the state level, at least most political decisions were being made at the state level, then you wouldn't feel that same sense of fear, because there would always be a place for you to go if your community decided to go in a certain direction. You could always leave and go to another state. You'd be free to do that. But if you're living in a world where you don't have that ability, there's no place for you to escape, you're going to feel that intense sense of fear about the next upcoming election. And that's really the issue. And frankly, Republicans have not done a whole lot to alleviate that, because Republicans at the national level want to go out. They talk about states' rights, but then they often want to make all of these big, large national policy decisions that they say are going to help everybody. And in many cases, I think they do, because I think they have a tendency to lean in the direction of free markets as opposed to the other side, which leans in the direction of socialism now. But at the same time, they're not giving the other side the ability to pursue their own way of life. And by not giving them the ability to do that, by not allowing Vermont to have their single-payer healthcare system, or California to have their single-payer healthcare system, or whatever, you're putting them in a situation where they feel like the only way they're going to get it is by imposing it on everybody else, and vice versa. The same thing is true. So we need to move toward a mindset where everybody understands that you can be an American and have fundamentally different ideas about certain things, like single-payer healthcare, for instance, and you can have that. You can try that program, and if it works, well, then other states are going to adopt it and embrace it. If it doesn't work, then other states are going to reject it. That needs to be, I think, a key foundational aspect of everything that the right does. That needs to be the olive branch, I think, that we reach out to the other side. Now, the other side traditionally doesn't want that. They want to impose their beliefs on us. I understand that the left historically has not embraced states' rights. But I think that there's an opportunity. In fact, I think Donald Trump in many ways blew this. He had a huge opportunity to move in that direction, because I think the left hated him so much and was so scared of him that they would have been willing to move in that direction, at least for a little while. And instead, we really didn't go in that. I think we have to start moving in that direction. That's where we can find commonality. We don't necessarily agree on everything, but we can at least agree that we have different ideas, and we're going to allow each other to try those different ideas without imposing our beliefs on other people. I think that's what we have to move toward if we're going to keep the country together over the next 100 years.
Hey, let's start by accepting the results of elections. That would be a great start.
But that's the point, right? The reason why they can't accept it is because of how important it is.
No, but too much skin in the game.
Well, I don't know. I mean, I didn't like it that Obama got elected twice. In fact, I wasn't upset that he got elected the first time. I was actually open-minded and hopeful that, maybe what he says is true. Maybe he's not a bullshit artist. Maybe he actually believes these things and he wants to unite
family
the country.
show, Jim.
I'll have to bleep that out. But but the people on the right accepted the results of elections, whether the Republicans lost one of the chambers of Congress or Obama was elected. They accepted that. From the minute Donald Trump was elected, the left and the media and Hollywood and everyone has been trying to get him out of there. It's illegitimate. Impeach him. Articles for impeachment were introduced before he was even inaugurated. I mean, this is where we live now. And I'm sorry. I think it's accurate. I think you have to be accurate here. It is the left that has caused the division in this country. The right is willing to accept at the basic level. The right is willing to accept the results of an election. The left fundamentally is not accepting when they lose. They will not accept it when the people pick somebody else than their preferred candidate. That is very, very toxic.
Doesn't Texas threaten to secede every time they talk about maybe a Democrat winning?
I don't
Like,
think.
let's just be frank about this. The reason that we have like there are very paternalistic sides of both side or political parties, right? You have the conservative side that wants everybody to live by their standards just as much as people on the left, right? We're different in that we're more libertarians and we don't want to get told how to live by anybody. But there are definitely prescriptive ways to live coming from both sides of the aisle, and frankly they're both obnoxious. Like I'm not going to get into the specific policy that I'm talking about on the right, but I think readers or listeners can probably deduce it. That should be a state issue. California, Washington, Colorado, just to leave a hint. But yeah, I mean, this should be a state thing because then there's less incentive for this to be a winner take all. And, eventually, this is just going to become so unworkable that this power has to start devolving from the federal government.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good points, fellas. Let's move on to our next topic area for right now. And that this is a headline from the Daily Mirror. Chaos map shows violent deaths will, quote, soar in 10 years due to food and water shortages. Violent deaths linked to price rises. That should be price increases, but, I didn't write the story. The Daily Mirror did. Price rises will soar around the world, including Europe, over the next decade, warns a major new study. Researchers say the number of deaths due to conflict and rioting caused by food, water, and fuel shortages is likely to increase rapidly over the next decade. And they have created a new interactive tool called the Chaos Map that records fatalities linked to price rises and resource shortages. This was produced by Dr. David Natalini, and Professor Aled Jones of the Anglia Ruskin University in the United Kingdom. And it shows that more than 1,300 deaths between 2005 and 2017 have been the result of violent unrest directly attributable to either food, water, or fuel insecurity. Now, I don't know, 1,300 doesn't seem like a very high number to me over that period of time when you're talking about the globe. So maybe there's a little less to this study than there meets the eye. And this is really an example of media hype, and if you have something catchy like Chaos Map, that's really going to get yourself some media attention. But they say that it's important to help understand that the, quote, escalating instability and chaos that can occur when pressures are caused by limited resources are compounded by factors such as climate change and rising populations. As climate change increases the severity of extreme weather over the coming years, and we're going to see continuing political instability, blah, blah, blah. Isaac Orr, what do you think about this Chaos Map study?
I think the best part about this article is that they're showing yellow vest protests in France that were protesting over the fact that it was a government policy trying to artificially increase the cost of diesel fuel in order to avert climate change,
Exactly.
Which is their entire premise for it. So good on you, Mirror. Brilliant, as my colleague John Phelan would say.
Yes. Well, it's actually in this article, they say, this is one of my favorite parts of the article. They say, in Europe, while we have already seen a limited number of deaths, that number I think would be zero. They say that without a full and transparent conversation between governments and its citizens around the need to move away from fossil fuels and more investment into resilient food and water systems, it is likely that we will not be immune to these events, by which they mean death. And they say, quote, it is difficult to pinpoint exactly what causes protests about rising fuel or food costs and how they turn violent. And this is where the risks lie. Justin Haskins, I don't think it's difficult to pinpoint at all. I think it has to do with central planning, communism, and you can just look to Venezuela, which was the one country that had more deaths than any other in 2017.
Yeah, I don't even really understand what they're going for here. I mean, first of all, it's 1,300 deaths between 2005 and 2017. So that's like what, depending on how they're doing this, it's about 12 years, right? So 12 years, 1,300 deaths. So we're talking about a little over 100 deaths per year. Do I
Yeah.
have that right?
Right.
Can that
Do-
possibly
do
be
to-
right? I mean, that's not that's really not. There's probably been more people who have died from falling down the stairs between that time period than there is from violent unrest directly attributable to either food, water, or fuel insecurity. And then in many cases, as you pointed out, how many of those people died from socialist governments having control over all of these things? They're the greatest source of food, water, or fuel insecurity in world history and human history. I mean, there's just absolutely no question about that. And in fact, even on their map, you can see in their chaos map, they have Venezuela as one of maybe a dozen countries or so that are labeled red because of the high level of chaos, I'm guessing, is what that indicates. And I mean, why do you think that is? It's obviously because they've been run by socialist governments, and central planning has driven that country from being one of the wealthiest countries in the world over, say 60, 70 years ago to now being a laughingstock of the world that is the source of chaos and unrest. So I'm not really sure what they're going for, because if they're not talking about, if they're not trying to tie any specific policy to this, and they're just saying, well, these things cause problems. Well, yeah, of course they cause problems. When there's no food and water, then yeah, there's unrest and people die when there's unrest. I mean, that shouldn't shock anybody. So it's a very strange thing. But as you pointed out, the climate change and rising populations, that is somehow this is only going to get worse.
Yeah.
As a result of that, I think that is really the issue here. Their own map does not indicate that. Their own map actually completely contradicts that idea.
This should be called the Paul Ehrlich chaos map, frankly. And I'm guessing it'll be wrong, because the access to food for people is only going to continue to grow in the future. We've talked about this when Ed Hudgens was on the show. We talked about the Steven Pinker book that basically shows that everything is getting better. It just takes time and it needs markets. So it's just so disingenuous. And just to throw this back to the free speech thing just for a moment, because this map reminded me of a comment that I was going to make. I think that people in the United States are willing to forego the benefits of free speech because they don't know what it's like to not have it. But hopefully this Hong Kong thing, and like, move to China, see how great you love being regulated based on your speech there.
Yeah, that's a good point. Speaking of China, China is listed on here as one of the blue countries for having a whole lot of problems related to this. What's interesting about that is they listed population growth as one of the primary factors that's going to cause all of these problems. And yet China has had extreme population growth over the past, 100 years, relatively speaking. And they haven't had those problems in the past 30 years or so, in large part because they've adopted more free market policies in their otherwise communistic, centrally planned economy. And that has actually lifted hundreds of millions of people from poverty as a result of that. The United States, again, one of the largest countries in the world in terms of population, is another one where there's been very little deaths related to unrest. So it just seems absurd on its face. The idea that climate change is going to cause all of these problems and population growth is going to cause all of these problems, when we can actually point to hundreds of millions of people around the world being lifted from poverty in places like China and India and elsewhere over this very same period where supposedly we've had this dramatic increase in global warming. And we've had dramatic increases in population in some of those places too. And yet we're not seeing the chaos that they're predicting is going to happen in just 10 years. It's just utterly ridiculous, but yet people will believe it because there's a news outlet out there saying it. And because they've been told over and over and over again by everybody from Leonardo DiCaprio to the New York Times that we're headed toward a climate change catastrophe that's going to wipe out human civilization over the next 80 years, unless of course we vote Democrat, and then everything will be solved. And that is the root of this fear that we have. It is completely fabricated.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually I guess the point of this for our listeners is if you see something called the chaos map, go ahead and click on it and find it. It's actually kind of hilarious because in 2007, Australia, I mean, most of the world doesn't have anything listed, anything at all. In 2007, Australia is listed as having one death caused by a food, fuel, or water resource problem. Like, how do you have unrest in which one person dies? Did the
What does that
person
even mean?
did the person have an aneurysm because they got upset about something? Is that
Yeah.
how that happens? I don't know.
What does that even mean? I don't even know I don't even know what that means.
Well,
I don't even know how you can have one person. How can you even calculate that?
Yeah.
I mean, that's
Well, I think the purpose of this study and the media around it, I mean, is to promote the idea, to promote socialism, Justin, as the solution to these problems. That we need more socialism in order to avert these things. I mean, there was a quote here, quote, "Without proper strategies to combat these shocks, it is likely that reactive policies from government will only make the impacts of these shocks worse, leading to bigger chaos events and more deaths." I see reactive. That word sprung out at me, because reactionaries are supposedly on the right? And so, a reactive policy, I don't know, might be free markets. And it seems like the solution for, especially, solution always has to be more government, right? That's the only way these things can be solved. Even though government solves, as you mentioned, Isaac, government is the one that creates the greatest shortages of food, fuel, and water and resources. It is the free market. It is liberty. It is countries like the United States. We don't have these problems. We've never had these problems. And it's not just because we are a land of plenty, but because we are not a centrally planned economy. We're not a centrally planned country. I hope we stay that way. Nothing to add to that, Isaac?
Well, I'm trying to get the stupid map to work, and it isn't projecting into the future. So, man, even in the future, nothing works.
Well, I think that's
to quote Spaceballs.
I think that's actually ominous. There is no future.
That is a Gen X reference for you, Jim. Don't you feel special?
No, I don't.
Yeah. Well, good.
Well, let's move on to another story then.
Let's do that.
We've beaten the chaos map to death. So here, I think this is important, an important story, and it's a growing story. Mark Zuckerberg was on Capitol Hill again this week, and I saw one story where they were obsessed with his Caesar haircut, and that he's cut his hair in a Caesar haircut because he's obsessed with Augustus Caesar. I don't know why I read this story this morning, but he named one of his daughters Augustus and the other one Maximus, and this is supposedly some kind of signal that Mark Zuckerberg, the founder of Facebook, has some kind of aims on world domination, and maybe that isn't false. Because here's the headline: CNBC, 47 attorneys general, and since we have 50 states, that's a lot of them. They are investigating Facebook for antitrust violations. This is a antitrust probe that started in the state of New York, to probe into Facebook, and it will zero in on whether Facebook broke any state or federal laws as a result of any anti-competitive conduct related to its dominance of social media. Meanwhile, Facebook is already facing a separate antitrust investigation launched by the Federal Trade Commission back in July. And then the FTC actually fined Facebook $5 billion over its privacy policies, which I'm quite certain Facebook can just shrug off like you and I would pay a parking ticket. Facebook and its rivals, including Google, Amazon, and Apple, also face a separate probe from the United States Department of Justice. And that probe, which opened in July, seeks to examine whether online platforms that dominate internet search, social media, and retail services have, quote, stifled innovation. This is a very controversial topic among libertarian organizations like the Heartland Institute and the people that we talk to. There is an argument to be made that Facebook and Google and Twitter and and Amazon and all of the big social media and digital media companies, I should say, are too large and control too much. I think that's a pretty compelling argument. And then the idea is, is it the job of government to intervene? Is Facebook too much of a monopoly? And really what we're talking about is monopoly on free speech and the dissemination of speech and the ability to suppress speech either secretly or overtly that very few people that run these companies may just decide they don't like. Justin, is that framing this very complicated question fairly?
I think so. I think I think it is really tough in some ways. For me, one of the things that really changed my mind kind of about this whole thing. Generally speaking, I'm pretty libertarian, and I don't believe that you should have the federal government engaging in antitrust uh, actions against large corporations just because they're successful corporations. Generally, I don't like that idea. I think that competition, however, is really good. And I think that you can have monopolies that cause problems. And I do understand that large corporations like Google, or Alphabet technically, but like Google and Amazon and others can buy their way into having a lot of political power and economic power, and that can be really bad for free markets as well. So I think that there are good arguments on both sides. But one of the things that really helped shape my current view on this is the idea that corporations in and of themselves, didn't exist from the beginning of time, right? Corporations are a legal government created entity. They're made up of individual people. So corporations do have some rights because the people who make up those corporations and own those corporations have rights. But corporations were created by government so that businesses, so that individuals wouldn't have as much liability. This was the primary reason. So that individuals wouldn't have direct liability, people who actually own the companies, in the same way that an individual who's not a corporation, who has a small business, might have direct liability if that business engages in various illegal activities or unethical activities or whatever. And so corporations were created by government in order to help shield the owners of those businesses from liability. So they get a benefit from this. The benefit is they're not personally liable for things that their business does. So in exchange for that, I think it's reasonable to say that there are conditions. If you're going to get these special legal protections that allow you to engage in certain activities without being personally liable for what your business is doing, well, then I think that it's okay for government to say we're giving you these special protections. So there are special conditions that are tied to those special protections. And if we were to have, because we talk about the power of Facebook to control free speech, and Google and other companies having the ability to control free speech, and should we be regulating them and all of this? If we didn't have corporations and these were owned by single individuals who were personally liable for the things that were happening on their platforms, well, then their business model couldn't exist. It would be totally and completely different. And you wouldn't have them engaging in the same sorts of actions that they have. So I think it's completely reasonable to say, look, we're giving you all kinds of special protections here. And in exchange for that, you have to play by certain rules so that you don't become too powerful as a result of those special protections. It's because this kind of corporation doesn't exist in a purely libertarian free market. It can only exist in a marketplace where government is creating special protections for the people that are creating corporations. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. But Isaac, I mean, the question, that is all, those are very good points by Justin, but the question still remains, is Facebook singularly too powerful just in the area of social media? And this is the way people exchange ideas. Look, they talked about how they felt like they were blindsided by $100,000 worth of ads by Russian bots and trolls. I mean, give me a break. And they're using that as justification. I think these are leftists that run these big corporations. It's leftists that run Facebook, and leftism rules Silicon Valley. And I'm convinced that they are not going to allow. They're going to do everything in their power to prevent Donald Trump from being elected again. And they have enormous power in what you see, what you can share with your friends on Facebook, how you can. This is the way we communicate digitally right now. Does Facebook have too much power in that regard, Isaac?
I don't know. Like, Facebook is the way that we reach the most people for our organization. So we don't love the fact that we pay Facebook to push our message out there. But they take our money, and yeah, I don't know, Jim. Like, I don't post a whole lot on my personal Facebook anyway, so
I don't either. But that's
So
I think Facebook has become too powerful in the sense that if they are allowed to because if they're basically skirting the existing law as it is. I mean, the law as it is actually not that bad. It says that if you're a platform and you're going to be an open platform, then you're not going to be held personally liable for the things that occur on your platform. And so that's how Facebook has presented itself, just like Twitter and just like a bunch of other things. And the same kinds of protections exist for search engines. So Google is not responsible for things that websites put out there that end up on their search results that might be illegal.
Right.
Google is not responsible. That's all good. I think that that's fine. The law is fine. The issue is that what Facebook is doing is they're very quietly, very secretly, very deceptively, in certain situations, choosing to ban people or to bring or to shadow ban people, make it harder for people to see the content of certain organizations and groups that they don't like because they don't share the same political beliefs that they do. And that is in direct violation of what the existing law already says.
Right.
So they're actually violating the law. They're not playing by the existing rules. So I think it's completely reasonable to say, if you played by the existing rules, then we wouldn't even be having this conversation about whether they're too big and too powerful.
Right.
So in a sense, are they too powerful? Yes, but they're not too powerful because they're a big corporation. They're too powerful because they're not playing by the rules that they're supposed to be playing by. And the government is not enforcing those rules. And they continue to allow Facebook and other organizations to essentially just mislead everyone and lie and say, no, we're not shadow banning just certain political views we don't like. We're treating everybody equally and fairly when obviously they're not. And I know from personal experience that they're not. They're liars.
Yeah.
And so if we enforce the existing laws, then all of these questions about antitrust stuff, I think, would go away, at least for people on our side of the aisle.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think people really think twice about the fact that Amazon is now such a behemoth that we all use Amazon, and I don't give it a second thought. If I order some paper towels or, some scrubbers for my cast iron skillet or something like that, it's like I don't give it a second thought. And that's because shopping is not a fundamental right protected in the Constitution. Shopping is not something that can help determine elections. And yeah, Justin, you do have personal experience because you tried to. You had for a good bit of time had bought, you paid Facebook to help promote your work on socialism, and then suddenly one day it just stopped, and they banned they suspended your account.
That's right. Yeah, they did. They stopped me from advertising on Facebook, and they gave all sorts of different explanations for why this was occurring. None of them made any sense. And then they refused to explain specifically what part of their policy I had violated, other than to say that I was engaging in misleading advertising, which was absurd because I wasn't even advertising a product. I was literally just paying money to have a video of me talking about socialism promoted to more people. That's all I was doing. So what could possibly be misleading about that? I mean, anything, if they might disagree with what I'm saying in the video, but it was all just political speech. And so it was obvious what they were doing. There was somebody at Facebook who was responsible for checking these things over that did not like my political speech. And so they were quietly just banning me. And because they probably didn't know who I was or that I had connections to Fox News and other organizations like that, they probably thought, who cares? We'll just ban this guy. We don't like him. I don't like this guy. And it won't be a problem. I was doing all of it through my personal accounts and stuff like that. They probably know nothing about me, who I work for, none of that. And so I think that they probably engage in these actions all the time with all sorts of different people and organizations that we never find out about. And I think they've been doing it for a very long time. They've been misleading and lying people. In some ways, it may not be quite as pervasive as some people think, but they're definitely doing it and they're definitely lying about it. And the government should enforce the existing laws, or they should force them to be personally liable for all of the material that's on their platform. It should be one or the other.
Yeah.
But they're not doing that right now. Right now, we're just sitting around waiting for something to happen. And until that time, yeah, I think Facebook thinks they can get away with at least some of this. And that's why it's so important for us to continue to put pressure on them, to at the very least make them to make them think twice about doing it in the future, because of even the possibility that they might lose their status as a sort of a protected corporation, a protected platform, and all of that all of those special protections they get. We have to continue to put the pressure on them so that they think twice about that in the future.
Yeah, I mean, I think if there was a company, and Isaac, maybe you can help us wrap this up. I mean, I'll tie it a little bit into energy, I guess. I mean, if Google controls 91% of all global search, or maybe just in the United States, but certainly if you took out China, which has special Google, I guess. But
Sure.
you know, but if let's just say every gas station, let's say 90% of the gasoline stations in this country were Shell. And I think the government might have an interest in breaking. It would call that a monopoly. It would have some. Would think it was in the public interest to break up that monopoly or regulate that or do something. I mean, it doesn't seem like we would put up with a 90% domination of a marketplace in almost any other sector of the economy, but we are when it comes to digital media. Because you strike me as skeptical of government involvement in or having some sort of regulatory solution to the dominance of just a handful of digital media companies that really control speech. A lot of it behind the scenes, subtly, and we don't even notice it. And that's really the danger here, I think.
I am skeptical of that because when you look at what's the most read website on climate change, it's What's Up With That. Like, it's not that we don't have a platform. It's just that they're not making it easier for us to engage in the battle of ideas on that platform. You're totally allowed to voice your dissatisfaction with that and to say, hey, treat me fairly. But I don't know. It just seems like, whining when you want to run to Uncle Sam and say, hey, we need to break this up. Like, it just doesn't sit right with me.
Yeah, I know. This is a complicated question for sure. I mean, and these are private companies, and libertarians and free market advocates say, hey, it's your company, run it the way you want. You can do whatever you want. You can discriminate if you feel like it. But I don't know.
That's my point, Jim, is like a libertarian would say that, we should just allow these corporations to engage in all of these actions. But then wouldn't a libertarian say that we shouldn't have government creating special classes of businesses that are shielded from personal liability and all of this other stuff too? So, I mean, if we're going to take a purely libertarian perspective on it, then I don't even know why we have a class of businesses that are protected from liability in the way that corporations are protected. That they shouldn't have special protections and special tax protections and all of these other things that they get as a result of being a corporation. Then that is government involvement at baseline. The existence of corporations means there's government involvement.
Well, there's more to a corporation than protection from legal liability. I mean, the Heartland Institute is technically a corporation. Corporation, the root word there is incorporate. This is to bring people that have a common goal together under one roof, under umbrella, to better advance those goals.
I'm not saying that there's something wrong with having corporations. What I'm saying is, if we're going to allow to have laws that create corporations and give them special advantages that you don't get if you're just an individual person, which is exactly what happens with corporations. There's tax advantages to them too if you're a business. So if you're going to give them special protections, then I think it's totally reasonable to tie those special protections to various rules. So in other words, if you brought up the example of a company owning 90% of the gas stations in the country. If that company was owned by a one person or by a family or something like that, but wasn't a corporation, and didn't have some special class tax advantages and special legal advantages that was created by the government to their benefit, then I would say absolutely you should not do anything to hinder that. But if you're going to get all of these special advantages from the government, then you're signing yourself up for the possibility of being subject to all kinds of other special rules and qualifications, and some of that might be antitrust. That's part of the deal.
Yeah.
You get certain things that are advantages, and then maybe as a result of that, you have to give up some of your freedom. That's what you signed up for when you created a corporation. So I'm okay with antitrust laws as long as it's only applied to corporations, I guess, because they get those special advantages that individuals don't get.
Yeah. All right, we're gonna have to leave it there. This issue obviously is not going to be going away. And I think it's a very complicated, interesting topic, and I think we can keep hashing it out in public. I think it's a good way to think about these things, and I hope our listeners agree. A couple more things here I want to get to before we run out of time. At the Pacific Research Institute, Sally Pipes wins the Intelligence Squared debate, arguing against the replacement of private health insurance. Sally Pipes, she's been on this podcast several times. She's a good friend out there at the Pacific Research Institute, where she's the president and CEO. She was voted the winner of the September Intelligence Squared debate titled Replace Private Insurance with Medicare for All, that was held in New York City. And I'm sure to a hostile audience, it was in New York City. Pipes argued against the replacement of private health insurance with debate partner Nick Gillespie, who is the editor of Reason Magazine, and Heartland knows him well and has done events with him here in Chicago. They did this in front of a live audience. Part of what Sally Pipes said was, quote, perhaps tonight's debate convinced that America's healthcare system is in need of change, and I agree with you. Private insurance is not perfect, but I hope that you will vote against the proposition because I believe that Medicare for All would leave us all much worse off. And Pipes also told the story of her own mother, who died of colon cancer. The doctors had ordered her as a senior to, well, you're just going to have to wait for a colonoscopy, just a basic colonoscopy. She was denied that, and then she died 2 weeks later from metastasized colon cancer. On the other side of the debate, Adam Gaffney, he was a pulmonary specialist at the Cambridge Health Alliance and Harvard Medical School. So this is a big heavy hitter of a doctor, and he's also the president. He was also the president of the Physicians for a National Health Program. It turned out that Sally Pipes and Nick Gillespie were voted as winners of the debate, classic Oxford-style debate, by 51% in the live audience. Justin, you tend to weigh in on healthcare topics for us. Obviously, you didn't get a chance to see this debate, but what do you make of the fact that there are advocates out there that are pushing pretty hard to abolish private health insurance, and that frankly that there is an organization that seems to be pretty influential called Physicians for a National Health Program. I mean, isn't that like, deers for hunting or or turkeys for Thanksgiving? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I think I think actually that there is a very large group of people, a very high proportion of doctors and medical specialists, especially in the academic setting. And many of the major hospitals in the country are academic teaching hospitals who believe that single payer healthcare is the right way to go. And I think it stems back to from an idea that I had mentioned earlier, which is that I think people on the left, many people on the left, not the hardcore socialist types, not the politicians, but your run of the mill left-wing person in America today. And many doctors fall into that camp. They just genuinely believe that these programs are going to help people. If I told them that if I could tell them with certainty that single payer healthcare would actually hurt people, then I don't think that they would necessarily support them. I think they support those ideas because they think it will help people. I don't think that it's interesting that doctors are often the ones that everybody turns to as being sort of authorities on these particular issues. They debate single payer healthcare. They have organizations that advocate for it. Doctors are not in any way experts on health insurance. They know nothing about health insurance. In fact, in many cases, private practice doctors are more likely to know more about health insurance companies and how health insurance works because they engage in that action all the time. But academic doctors, they don't deal with health insurance companies. They know nothing about health insurance policy. They're not reform or policy experts. They don't teach you that in medical school. They don't teach you anything about that in medical school. In fact, it is not part of your curriculum. So the idea that just because you're a doctor makes you an expert on single payer healthcare just simply isn't true. But they don't, and because of that, they don't know anything about the single payer healthcare countries that exist around the world. They don't know about the rationing and the wait times that exist in Canada and in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. They don't know about the higher mortality rates for a variety of different illnesses that exist in those countries. They don't know that in places like Scandinavia, where life expectancy is much higher and they have single payer healthcare, that they've had higher life expectancy because of dietary differences and cultural differences and genetic differences and things like that going all the way back to before they had single payer healthcare. People just don't know the facts when it comes to these things. And I think when they hear the facts, and I think the result of this debate is evidence of that, when they understand that there are serious dangers that exist to single payer healthcare, that single payer healthcare has resulted in lots of suffering and pain around the world, and there are a lot of broken, failed single payer healthcare systems. When people are given access to that information, and they're not just getting all of their information from Washington Post and ABC News, when they actually see the facts for themselves, they're less inclined to believe that this is going to work, that this is going to be effective. What people want is they just don't want people without health insurance. And I think that if you could provide them with an alternative model that would actually work and provide access to healthcare for everybody, and there are plenty of really good, mostly free market policies out there that advocate for that. They've been around for decades and decades and decades, just nobody hears about them. If they were aware of those things and they understood about health savings accounts and they understood about direct primary care and other reform ideas that we talk about at Heartland all the time, then I think that they would be more inclined to reject single payer healthcare and go with something else. They just don't know that these things exist. They think the current system is what everybody on the right is advocating for, that we love the current system. We don't. The current system sucks. We need to change it. It's just most people think that this is a choice between single payer healthcare and what we've got right now. And so they choose single payer healthcare. Yeah. We need to completely change the conversation.
Well, it's good that a debate is happening. And if I ever, I'm picking you as my partner if I ever get dragged into one of these debates. And I'm just going to sit there and I'll take notes and sip coffee, and you can probably.
I'll take Matt Brunig.
Shut up, Isaac.
All right. Well, Isaac, hey, we got just a couple minutes here. Then we have to, and we're wrapping up. But yeah, you're our resident expert on Bette Midler, I believe. Isaac, I know you're a big show business fan, a big show tunes fan, and so I'm going to have to ask you to react to this. I mean, on Wednesday of this week, she lashed out at Senator Rand Paul over his criticism of the Kurds. I don't know why you get upset about that, by lauding his neighbor who brutally beat the senator, breaking several of his ribs in his Kentucky yard back in 2017 in a politically motivated attack. Gosh, you might call it a hate crime. I don't know. But she tweeted this. I love this, but she tweeted, quote, "I do not promote violence, but ... Rand Paul says the Kurds are being ingrates for taking their frustrations out on U.S. troops, which is a good reminder for all of us to be more grateful for the neighbor who beat the poop out of Rand Paul." Of course, she has since deleted that tweet, but the internet is forever.
Man, I've never actually watched a whole Bette Midler film. Not even Hocus Pocus. When I was little, it kind of frightened me. I'm not big into witchcraft and stuff like that. But
Beaches. You watch that. You have an annual thing on that on your birthday. You watch Beaches, right? Because it makes you cry.
I'm not even familiar with the film.
Oh, gosh, Justin, I am old. I am 104 years old.
Dude, you are, yeah, like the worst of the greatest generation, Jim Lakely.
Oh boy.
Sorry. Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't care what celebrities think. So like she made a stupid tweet. Like, whatever.
I think one thing that's interesting, we don't really talk about foreign policy here very much, obviously. It's not something that either of our think tanks do. But one of the things that I find really interesting is that the left's obsession now with loving the Kurdish people and how they're so angry that the Kurds have been betrayed by Donald Trump. What's really fascinating to me about that is that, did any of these people realize that there are lots of Kurdish people who live in Iraq and who were hurt by the idea that we were pulling out of Iraq? That was a really big issue at the time, that they were all anti-war, all opposed to the war in Iraq. They didn't care about the Kurds for years and years and years. What would happen to the Kurds? Nobody cared on the left. Nobody. Now all of a sudden the Kurds are like the most important people in the world to them.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I'm willing to bet that we can go back and find all kinds of Bette Midler comments about how we shouldn't be in the war in Iraq. I mean, I don't know that because I don't follow her every single day and pay attention to what she has to say, but I'm willing to bet almost anything that she was against the war in Iraq. And she wanted us to pull out of the war in Iraq. She wanted us to leave Iraq during the George W. Bush administration. I'm willing to bet that she was against that war. And yet that was bad news for the Kurds back then too. So regardless of what you think of what's been going on with Donald Trump and the Kurds, and regardless of what you think of the war in Iraq and all that's irrelevant. The point is the left has been more hypocritical on a variety of different issues under the Trump administration than I think that they have ever been, which is really saying something because they've been hypocrites for a very long time. But they just do not care anymore about any principles at all. Any principles at all. All they care about is beating Donald Trump, hating Donald Trump, destroying Donald Trump. They are so obsessed with Donald Trump that they will contradict themselves all day long. If Donald Trump comes out, you want to kill single-payer healthcare, Donald Trump should come out in favor of single-payer healthcare tomorrow. If he comes out in favor of single-payer healthcare tomorrow, it will be the worst thing that has ever happened in the history of America, according to the left. That is how they view everything.
I think you're onto something. I think he needs to embrace the Green New Deal.
Yeah,
he has to, and then maybe things will actually turn around in this country. I find it hilarious with these celebrities. I mean, the Kurds. I don't think most of these celebrities thought the Kurds had anything else to do with cottage cheese. That's probably the only thing they thought of when it came to Kurds. And now they're experts and are outraged over something they didn't even know about 20 minutes ago.
Yeah, the Kurds are the largest ethnic minority in Iraq. It's about 15 to 20% of that country's population.
Right.
And they did not care at all about any of those people. Millions of them. There's like 8 million Kurds or something in Iraq. They did not care at all about the Kurds during the war in Iraq. And now all of a sudden it's all they can talk about. Yeah. It's just unbelievable.
All right. That's too much. That's way too much foreign policy. We have to stop right now. And speaking of cheese Kurds, Isaac Orr, Wisconsin native, what is a way that our good listeners can get hold of you and track you down?
Oh, that transition, man.
You like that?
It was great. Well, good sir, the people can find me at Isaac Orr on Facebook. No, don't look at my Facebook. I'm the fracking guy on Twitter. I was just really trying to pull off the Donnie impression at the end, and I kind of stumbled out of the gate.
Yeah.
And at AmericanExperiment.org.
Yeah, it was a cheese curd transition from hell that really threw you off.
Justin, it was just so greasy. I was thinking about those good curds. You get them all lightly battered.
Yeah, I got to get to Culver's today. Justin Haskins, how can the listeners find you?
At Justin T. Haskins on Facebook and Twitter.
Look for the big, beautiful check mark.
Blue check mark. You missed the blue part, man. Yeah. You're just really all over it. You're not over it at all today, Isaac. You're really falling apart.
It's because I couldn't do my Donnie impression the whole time.
I know. Threw you off. Sorry, Bo. Yeah.
And I'm Jim Lakely. You can find me at J Lakely on Twitter, and you can also find the Heartland Institute at Heartland Inst, and also look for Heartland Tube on YouTube. Thank you all for listening, and we will talk to you next week.
Next week,
we might have to put that in there.
Next week.
I think you should just continue the podcast.
Next week.
This needs to go in at the end.